Welcome to another episode of Holocaust Remembrance Around the World, where we find people that are shaping and reshaping Holocaust memory and education. I'm Lois Roman, and I'm the producer of this show, and today we have a very special guest, Dr. Mehnaz Afridi. She is the director of the Holocaust Genocide Interfaith Center at Manhattan College in Riverdale, New York, and she's truly a citizen of the world. A Pakistani Muslim who studied undergraduate here in the United States at Syracuse University and received her PhD in South Africa. Her research interests include Holocaust, interreligious identity, diaspora transnationalism, feministic post-colonial theory. She has a huge list of publications to her name, ranging from the Qu'ran and human rights, Islamic culture, Judaism and Islam, and she's the author of The Shoah Through Muslim Eyes. Her passion is in education, and today I have the honor of sitting down with her to discuss her thoughts on Holocaust education in the 21st century. Welcome, Dr. Afridi.
Thank you so much, Lois. It's such an honor to be here and to be with you. What a welcome.
I am so excited to talk to you today because you truly sit at the pinnacle of interfaith conversations. So you're a Muslim woman, you're running a Holocaust Center, and you're working at a Catholic university. So I was wondering if we could just start off, give us a little sense of your background. How did you arrive at this point in your life and your career?
Well, I have kind of a personal journey and then I have a professional journey. I was born in Pakistan, and my two Muslim parents who moved around a lot because my father was an international banker. So we moved right away to Zurich, Switzerland. So Swiss German was my first language. And I was speaking Urdu at home. And then I learned English in London when we moved there. And then we moved to Luxembourg, and then we moved to Geneva, Switzerland again, where I learned French. And then we moved to the Middle East. And then I moved to New York after that. And then my parents moved on. And I kind of stayed in the United States and then got my PhD. But I think that journey, that personal experience of moving around, really, absorbing the language, the cultures, the colors, the smells, were really important and very defining moments for me, and actually most kids that do have this kind of background, as I've found. But I think what's really was enlightening for me was that I always hung out with the others, who were the Jewish kids and the Hindu kids and the Muslim kids. So there was this kind of grouping of, there was an othering of us, and I was the brown kid, the Muslim kid, always sitting with the Jewish kid or the Hindu kid, and we seemed to just accept each other. And then there was predominantly the European Christian and American white kids. It was racial and religious. It was these two dimensions that were going on. And so I had a very liberal upbringing where my parents had my Russian Orthodox friend over for Eid al-Fitr, and then which is after Ramadan, and then I would go over and celebrate Hanukkah with her. So I grew up knowing Jews and also Hindus. I had a very close Hindu friend. And then when I moved to the Middle East, the Jews disappeared. And I said, whoa, what's going on? And so that disappearance, that erasure of the word Jew from our books in Israel, and got me very curious. And then I ended up in New York, where it was predominantly Jewish American, where my parents were harassed because they were Muslims. So things were just turning around in my mind as a young person. And I was going, what is really going on here? And so I think these things compelled me to work in this area. And I became a TA for Dr. Alan Berger, who shaped the way I think. And really, I knew about the Holocaust, but never in this depth. And then I went to Israel in 1995, and I thought I was going to create world peace between Jews and Muslims. So that's the impetus of my work. And I still believe that. But and then I started to study the Holocaust because I felt like there wasn't a voice in the Muslim world that was directly studying the Holocaust. There was so much Holocaust distortion. There was so much Holocaust relativization, and it was out of frustration and my care and love for the scholarship and the people who perished that I wrote my book. And I wrote my book purposely as both a trade book, but also a scholarly book, because I wanted more and more people to read it. And it really was for me an acknowledgement of a Muslim woman saying, yes, indeed, this all happened. And here are my interviews with survivors. So I really wanted to, that was just a small gesture I wanted to make in my life as both a scholar and as a Muslim woman towards Jewish people.
Well, they always say if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. And it sounds like your personal experiences help shape you into the scholar that you are today. The Fish Center actually had an opportunity to share the podium on International Holocaust Remembrance Day just recently with the Crossroads of Civilization Museum in Dubai. And our founder, Emil Fish, who's a survivor, actually was in Dubai with the head of our program, Dr. Pilnek, to talk about international Holocaust remembrance in countries that are not used to talking about that. And this museum in Dubai has one of the first Holocaust exhibitions, permanent exhibitions in an Arab land. And so we've been spending a lot of time before and after that event talking about how we can continue to further this dialogue. We learned a lot when we went there and met with them, and to see if there's more opportunities to educate people in countries that are not generally associated with the Holocaust. So as we pivot our conversation to Holocaust education, I guess my big question is, how do you make it relevant to young people today, people that have never met a survivor in person, people that don't live in countries where there were Holocaust memories there physically, and in places where they might say, this is not my history?
Mm-hmm. No, it's a great question, honestly, Lois. And it's a very important question, because one of the things that I have been trying to do is to expand the field of Holocaust education. The first thing I wanted to do was to show the geographic scope of how far the Nazis went to exterminate Jews. But I also wanted to expand that geographic scope to tell the story of what was going on with Arabs and Muslims and Africans under the Vichy government and under colonization. Why is that important to a young person? It's important for a young person because then we start to talk about race, power, colonialism, and how actually why the Holocaust becomes so crucial is that there's a lot going on during the Holocaust to Jewish people, but also in the world. And how do you explain that? So what I try to do in my classes is I try to teach the Holocaust as a global phenomenon, that it was not isolated. This is not just Jewish. This is, as Yehuda Bauer says, it's a lessons for humanity. And I believe that. And I believe that very strongly as a Muslim. And when I begin my classes on the Holocaust, I start with the Herero genocide. Because I feel that if we don't talk about racism, colonialism, we are really doing injustice to what the Nazis believed of other people and where that came from. And that's what interests students, because we are talking about racism a lot around the campus. We're talking about gender issues, racial issues, we're talking about inequities. All of these contemporary sort of problems and concepts and ideas can be taught with analyzing what happened during the Holocaust. And I think it's time for Holocaust educators to get excited, because this is our time. This is like, yes, we can do this, and we can talk about racism. We can talk about religious discrimination. We can talk about colonialism. We can talk about gender discrimination. I mean, there's so many things we can do. So I think the Holocaust as itself actually encourages younger people to take for those lessons and to carve out their own projects. And to me, that's important enough.
I think it's so important to recognize how large the Holocaust was and to not get into the one-upsmanship that happens sometimes, where people say, oh, there was the Holocaust, but then there was this genocide and there was that genocide, and ours was bigger and ours was longer and ours was more important to me. They're all important, but certainly the Holocaust has some issues surrounding it that makes it somewhat special, and it certainly happened before many of these other genocides, not before all of them.
Mhm.
And it was so far-reaching that I think students today don't really understand that. And especially in countries where, because they have their own very long histories, World War II history is a nanosecond in their history book.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, we're talking about Dubai earlier. So I think it's wonderful to have this exhibit. I haven't been there physically, I've seen it virtually. And I really applaud UAE and other countries that are, accepting their relationship with Israel and also doing Holocaust education. I mean, Morocco's was on the forefront of this for a very long time. And I think the Holocaust also has its own stereotyping in the Middle East, right? And in South Asia and Africa. The stereotype is the Holocaust is all about the Jews and they exaggerated it because of Israel, right? And there's a lot of this geopolitical nonsense that stops us from moving forward with very controversial topics in different cultures, here included in the United States. So I think if you teach the Holocaust, or, I just built a curriculum for a Muslim high school in Brooklyn. And the first day that I was there, and all the students were Muslim, we talked about stereotypes of Jews, and they had the same stereotypes that most Americans do, or most of the world does. Unfortunately, I have to say that the Jews are rich, they control Congress, not only they're rich, they control Congress, and they are conspiring. So these tropes that, started with anti-Semitism, but also go back, far back from the time of the Nazis, I could break that down in 10 minutes statistically. And they were turned around, right? But the point was that they could do it with a Muslim teacher, right? And they could listen to a Muslim teacher. I had I don't have an agenda, right? My agenda is peace and to be factual and historical and be thorough with what we do. It was the most amazing thing that happened. I remember being invited to Ohio by actually a Palestinian professor to give a talk. And there were Saudi students in the class. There were about 20 of them. They were exchange students. They were incredible. They were coming to me and taking pictures of me and themselves and selfies and saying, we've never met a woman like you. Because I was talking about anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, right? And they started to see the connections. And I think if we are not going to connect these things for young people and not have them invest in something emotionally or physically, right? Their own physical harm. If there are Black students or our Muslim students or our Jewish students today, unfortunately, those three groups, and Asian students, what are we investing in? You can't teach from up here, you have to teach in here.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that. Now, I think at Manhattan College, you've started a few programs where you try to break down some of those barriers, where you actually force people of different backgrounds, different ages to work together. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, there's a few things I've done in the last 10 years, actually, in terms of the program. So, the Holocaust Genocide Interfaith Education Center is a complex title. I did not come up with it. But anyway, so I focus on the lessons of the Holocaust. So we do a lot of Holocaust programming. Our big thing is, Kristallnacht lecture, which is the Schweitzer lecture. I also focus on Yom HaShoah, International Holocaust Remembrance Day. And we do, I do a lot of training on anti-Semitism, like building of this curriculum, etc. We also focus on genocide. I'm hosting Weiwei Nu, who was a victim of the Rohingya genocide, and she started a women's network. So she's going to come and have a discussion with us. And then I'm doing a program in anti-Semitism and Islamophobia in Europe by a Muslim friend of mine, a scholar who's here in the country now, and he's going to talk about what are the differences between Europe and America. And I think that's very important. The interfaith projects that I've done locally are with yeshiva students here in Riverdale, Holocaust survivors, my Muslim students, and my Catholic students. So I put them together for a whole year. And it's been the most amazing journey because they're all different. They're different racially, they're different in terms of age, they're different in terms of socioeconomic and religion. But they've managed to do projects together and work together and created a video of the survivor. And they have very different questions. But what I noticed was how the yeshiva students learned so much about the Holocaust through my students because they were so reticent. I don't want to know anything about this. But they were interested in what others wanted to know about them. So there's a lot of things we don't know when we put people together. And so that's one of my really fantastic projects that I've done. And I've done interreligious training here with even evangelical Christians, because I believe that we have to talk across the divide, and Sunni and Shia Muslim, and Reform and Orthodox Jew. So, and also liberal and conservative Catholic. So we had a training a couple of years ago before COVID where they come together and we went to the city, but to no religious site. We just did very cultural things and had meals together. And they actually, their evaluation was that was the best part because they weren't forced into anyone's religious space. So there's a lot of things I can keep talking about because we do 10 events plus other programs a year, and it's a very busy center. And also being full-time teacher, it's crazy.
Right, you're certainly very busy. And I always do believe that breaking down barriers comes to the person-to-person interaction, and whether it's in person or on Zoom or getting to know a survivor from a video even, that when we talk so often about the 6 million, it means nothing to us. And we end up with, collecting paper clips and collecting buttons and planting tulips. And these are all wonderful things, but they're just symptoms of how difficult it is to wrap our head around a giant number. But if you start viewing them as 1 times 6 million individuals with lives and names, then sometimes that helps, we find in Holocaust education, for the people to absorb the story. They don't have to know 6 million stories. They have to read one memoir of one person who lived in one place to kind of understand not everything and not every aspect of the Holocaust, but to really feel it inside. And I think your program does that, in many, many ways. Now,
yeah, we try.
So how do you measure success as a Holocaust educator? So you bring students into your program at the college level, the master's level. You can measure that because you see where they end up. When you're creating education plans for a school in Brooklyn, you pop in there, you do your thing and you leave, and you have no idea. And then, unfortunately, sometimes we hear in the popular media, whether it's on TV or in the newspaper, people make big mistakes about not understanding Holocaust facts. And so how do we measure our success as educators?
Well, that's a tough question. For the school in Brooklyn, we do have a self-evaluation that they're going to be doing. I have one more class to teach, but I think the first day I was there, I kind of felt, okay, I did one thing and I was like, I'm ready. So, I think it's expectations too, Lois, to be honest. What are my expectations? I think I have a lot of high expectations of myself because, I believe in the Islamic principles of justice and being honest and being truthful and working hard. And I need to fulfill that. And I feel like if I can fulfill that, then I can see some transformations in my students. I have engineering students who stop by and say, hey, I was thinking about you today because of this controversy that's going on TV, like the Whoopi Goldberg thing. What do you think, Dr. Fried? So I think one of the things is that I have created so much curiosity around the Holocaust. And I have an exhibit that I opened here in 2019, where we have a concentration suit that was worn in Riga ghetto, where students stop and they have to look and think. We have a book that says Jew 6 million times, and next to it, I have the documents of the Nazis that were indicted. And so I have both juxtaposed so the students say, hey, why does this say Jew, Dr. Breathing 6 million times? I said, because everyone was a human being. And then they look at the Nazi book and they said, what's this? These are the guys who didn't get caught, right? So there's these two elements of what so I have visuals that I present them, but I also present them with challenges and problems that are important to them ethically, which is, I remember 3 years ago, there was on the New York subway, I think you may remember the swastikas, and it said, Jews should burn in the ovens. And then one person went up and erased it, and then people started erasing it. And so I gave that example, like, what would you do? And they were frightened because they said, I don't know. And I think that's honest. And I'm not, I think I would probably have the same response. As heroic as one might feel, one might not know what the circumstances are. So I think, but it's really important for my students to ask that question every single class, whether it's in my Islam classes, whether it's in my Holocaust classes, whether it's in my genocide classes, but they must ask themselves that question: what would I do? What is my responsibility today?
Yeah, I think that's a really difficult question to answer for anybody. And, when you read Holocaust literature and memoirs, even fiction, which is sort of based loosely on someone's life, um, especially diary entries, which are not fiction, but you realize that many of the heroes that we have from the Holocaust didn't set out to be heroes. They didn't have a Superman suit under their clothes. They were just needed to make an instantaneous decision. Someone was running towards them and they either opened the door or they shut the door. And, you know, I think that's a part of this decision-making process that will always elude us. But I think it's very important to keep telling those stories to people because, you know, some people call Holocaust education character education. It's ethics, it's morals, and it's universal. It doesn't matter what religion you follow or where you live on this planet. It's human to human interaction.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I mean, if you listen to survivors, I love it because they just look at, I asked them about their survival and they say, it was just timing. It was just a matter of a split second. And then there's some that say it was a miracle from God. So there's these two very interesting, I mean, at least the ones that I've interviewed have kind of responded that way, which I think is really interesting. And also what liberation meant to them was very different in terms of how we celebrate liberation. Because liberation to a survivor was, where do I go now? I have no home, I have no town, I have no family. So there's a lot of interesting ways that we can think about the Holocaust, even in terms of the immigrant issues today. So I brought that in also in classes in terms of, what's going on in our borders today, what went on during World War II, who did we let in, who did we not let out. And so if you visit Manhattan College, you will also find that I have a little exhibit. In my exhibit, I have a little space for the Oswego camp, which is up north, which very few people know about, and I visited it. So I tell that story, which is really important. And there was a sheet that they had to sign, and when they were in the Oswego camp, saying that they had no right to stay if they were asked to leave. And it's an amazing document. And I found all this in Herman Ziering's files, and also his wife, when she left Sarajevo with her mother, she came to the Oswego camp. So it was a perfect connection for me because I'm also educating the students about immigration policy today. That's how you connect with the young people,
Exactly. And there are so many scary similarities from one to the other. They just needed to be pointed out to people.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you mentioned the exhibit at Manhattan College. So do you have any thoughts on, as we move forward with the young people, they're so technologically savvy, they carry their phones around, we're launching into the world of virtual reality and AI. Where do you think, where do you see Holocaust education going on that front? Will we be using a lot of virtual reality and AI in our education? Are there limits? Are there some things that just shouldn't be represented ever to students in that kind of environment? It's too scary, it's too overwhelming. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I know that USC has done the kind of holograms of survivors. You've seen those, right? I saw, and I took my students to one here at the Jewish Heritage Museum a few years ago when it first was established. And they were intrigued. The students were like, wow, this is amazing, right? There is something to be said about the live interaction between a student and a survivor. But I have to say that technology is there and it's beautiful and it's lovely and I love it. And I think the young people will kill me if they hear this, but I don't think they know how to work it to their advantage. So I'm an educator and I also have a teenage daughter. I feel that my students really don't use technology as a tool, but they use technology as entertainment. Mm-hmm. And there's a big difference between the two. And what we have done wrong is that we haven't taught them well enough how to use technology. So you could have an amazing site like the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum on Holocaust education. You could have digital humanities sites, right? They're beautiful, they're blogs, they're like forget it. My students are not interested because they don't know how to get there and what to look for. And this is something we need to teach them. And it's a practical skill that I want to teach them. And I do a digital humanities class in the Holocaust just so that they understand that these platforms are there for research and how to do, things like statistics, on what happened in the Holocaust. I mean, these like very simple steps. And they're pretty amazed that these platforms are available. But we haven't really taken the time because it's been so quick with the technological advancement to sit down with the young people and say, all right, cool, you have this tool. We love it. We created it. But let's talk about how we use it.
Right. We did a seminar, an educational seminar for high school history teachers a couple of weeks ago. And I was talking with one of them and I asked, what kind of knowledge do the kids come into your classroom with? And they taught freshmen, so that they were still young. And they said, well, honestly, most kids come in only knowing about zombie Nazis from Call of Duty video games. And then we pick it up from there. And, the popular culture, our kids are exposed to things at very young ages. You can't monitor it. As much as you feel as an educator that you want to start in 1933 and have them understand what happened from 1933, before you ever get to the gates of the concentration camp, there's so many aspects to it, but the kids
absolutely,
are picking up elements from all over, and it's not evenly spread in their knowledge base. They don't understand it, or hopefully not, aspects of the Holocaust are glorified that shouldn't be. And so that, I think, as educators is one of our biggest challenges, is to rein it in and so in a way simplify and then stick to the facts.
Yeah, I mean, I think that exactly. And I think that gaming, other misinformation, that is a big problem. That's why I'm saying we have to teach them how to decipher information even before they get to our classroom somehow. So for high school teachers, they should be doing that. If they give them a research project, they need to be directing them where that research comes from. Because by the time they get to college, we are hoping they know how to do that, but they don't. Especially the first year students and the sophomores, because they haven't had the experience. So that's what I'm talking about, is that technology is a great tool, but how you use it matters really, really greatly. And what you do with it, because we adults are like little kindergartners with it because of the social media messes, the kind of cancel culture we have. So what are we emulating for our new generation is another question I ask myself as an adult.
I agree. So if I switch gears just a little bit, you mentioned anti-Semitism earlier, and I'm curious, do you feel like the anti-Semitism we're seeing in the world today is the same as what led up to the Holocaust? Or is the anti-Semitism different today, and why or why not?
Okay, I mean, I think there are similarities and differences. Let me say that. And the similarities are that a lot of the old tropes, the anti-Semitic tropes, are being used by white nationalist groups, especially, and also in places like Hungary and Poland and some Muslim countries. So I'm seeing a repetitive move in terms of that. If this was another topic, I could explain to you why it's seeping into the Muslim psyche and how that happened. But these groups are really creating this sort of hyperbolic Jewish presence in the world. That is what scares me about anti-Semitism in the 1920s and 30s, right? Now, what's different is that most people, I mean, our laws in this country are very different, that we can condemn something like anti-Semitism and Islamophobia and Black racism. I'm not saying we're clean and whatever, but it's not state sanctioned. And I doubt it will be state sanctioned. And I'll give you an example. The litmus test was the Muslim ban recently. And I remember going to a demonstration against the Muslim ban with my daughter, who then was younger. And what we experienced was beautiful. We saw more Jews there and non-Muslims than anybody else. And we won because we have a law that says that you cannot discriminate according to race or religion in terms of immigrant policies. And that was done in 1964, 1965 by Lyndon B. Johnson. Something I just taught today, actually, about that law. So, I mean, here you have this wonderful country that has actually laws against this. So I think that's a huge difference. And that's something we need to celebrate. Because one of the things that we don't celebrate enough is that we do have the freedom of religious freedom. We have religious freedom. In Germany, we don't have religious freedom. In France, we don't have religious freedom. In Iraq, we don't have religious freedom. And, you know, it's like, you know, there's pockets in Pakistan, maybe you do, maybe you don't. So one of the most brilliant things about the United States that I don't think people care about enough is that I can wear whatever I want. You can wear whatever you want. You know, you can wear a yarmulke. You can't do that in the public sector in France. So there is this pushback against religion in a way in different countries, different kinds of pushback, whether it's secular or intolerance. But here in the United States, even if people look at you nervously if you're wearing a hijab or a yarmulke or, you know, a wig, they can't do anything. It's not, the racism is not tolerated.
I totally agree. And I honestly wish that we would have more positive human interest stories in the media that celebrate cultural coming together rather than all of the bad issues that happen, whether it's attacks on Asians walking down the street or Islamophobia or anti-Semitism. And, you know, teaching moments like that are huge. To teach the positive rather than teach the negative.
Yeah, and I think our young people are tuned out because they see so much negative. So they go onto these, you know, TikTok sites about absolutely nothing political or social. So there are, I mean, and I think, and I encourage teachers to do this, is experiment with your students in terms of giving them research projects on how are Jews represented in the media? How are Muslims represented? I mean, this is something I'm doing with my first year students, and try to make them aware that there's a representation going on of races and cultures. And they literally tell me that they don't watch the news, they don't look at the headlines. Their homepage is like their design. So it's like there's this disconnection. And the reason they say they're disconnected is that it's always so negative.
Right. Certainly our young people seem to want to be very involved in the creation of what they're bombarded with.
Yes.
Right. And so whether that's their Facebook page or their TikTok or their Instagram. And, you know, I think that as Holocaust educators, I think if we can get our message out on the platforms that young people are accessing, that's also very important.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, I think definitely, you know, TikTok, there is a Holocaust education like whole page, and do a lot of educational stuff in that.
right. So if you could teach the Holocaust in 14 seconds, you're good. So in all the classes that I've taken in my Holocaust studies, the aspects of philosophy come into almost everyone, whether it's a film class or a literature class or popular culture or even history class. And the question that we always ask ourselves is, what does it mean to be human? Now that we've studied all these injustices and man's inhumanity to man, what does that mean? What does it mean to be human? What does that mean to you?
Mhm. You know, it just reminded me of the Sonnenblume, Simon Wiesenthal's, you know, the sunflower. Because I'm in that book. I wrote a response to the second volume. It's still not in English, but I wrote it in German about what would be my response as a Muslim, right? And I love that question of forgiveness, right? And I love that question of acknowledgement, because I think that's the toughest thing to do, and that's what it means to be human. I think acknowledging, being self-critical, and accepting or forgiving is really where we're at. Because I mean, one of the things we don't realize is that it's not, you know, X versus Y or Y versus X. It's also X versus X and Y versus Y. And that's even more problematic, right? So we're constantly thinking in these big sort of stereotypes, whereas, you know, people in that same country don't really agree with any. I mean, we know that from the United States. So I guess for me, it's such a challenging thing but we must do it, is to have these diverse opinions where we can sit there without, you know, attacking each other or being emotional, and acknowledge what they're saying and listen to what they're saying. I think that is being human, because that's really taking you out of your comfort zone and saying, okay, you know, this person suffers, or this person feels this way about me or my people or my country or my situation. And that's called reconciliation. I think being human is to reconcile.
Thank you. I always ask our guests to close with some kernels of wisdom, which of course you just did, but I'll ask you one last time. Are there any action words that you want to leave our audience with? Our audience is made up of students and adults, lay people from all over the world. What message do you want to leave them with?
Okay, I mean, I do believe in one thing, and I think I've kind of stood the line for a long time, and people have quoted me on this, is that it's more important to fight for someone else than oneself.
Beautiful words. And if only everyone who was alive during the Holocaust in Europe could have done that, or for any of the genocides all over the world, imagine how different the world would be.
Exactly. Yeah.
Dr. Afridi Mehnaz, thank you so much for your time today. Very
Lauren.
enlightening conversation. I want to thank our technical assistants from Alana Murley on today's episode. I also want to thank our viewers. I hope that you'll Tune in next month when we travel to Guatemala to meet with Marco Gonzalez. The Fish Center at Yeshiva University has a primary mission of educating educators, and we have, for our future leaders in the field, an MA program, which we'll talk about now.
If there's truth to the saying that history repeats itself, then Holocaust remembrance and the study of genocide is not only a vital part of history, but also a crucial warning for the future.
Confronting Holocaust deniers and distorters is one of the most important tasks of our generation.
The Fish Center at Yeshiva University was founded with this mission of preserving the history of the Holocaust as well as more recent genocides. Our master's program offers a unique investigation of the Holocaust of European Jewry with an interdisciplinary approach through the lenses of law, social work, history, theology, education, literature, and political science. If this sounds like a path you would like to pursue, apply now or learn more. I'd like to extend an invitation for you to join us and become a member of our growing community of scholars and educators.
We'd also like to thank all of our community partners. We are always looking for new community partners. If anybody would like to become one, please reach out to us on our website. The Holocaust and Human Rights Center in White Plains, New York, the Center for Holocaust Education in the East Valley JCC in Arizona, 3GNY, the Florida Holocaust Museum, the Rabbi Arthur Schneier Program for International Affairs at Yeshiva University, Shadowlight in Canada, Manhattan College, the Sosua 75 in the Dominican Republic, the Holocaust Memorial and Museum in San Antonio, Texas, Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Studies Center in South Africa, 2 different programs at the University of Miami, the Holocaust and Education Center in Fukuyama, Japan, the Illinois Holocaust Museum in Skokie, the Sister Rose Thiering Fund in Education for Jewish and Christian Studies, the Lake District Holocaust Project in the UK, Jewish Gen, and the Maltz Museum in Cleveland, Ohio. Thank you to everybody again, and see you next month.